Hey, I just wanted to say a few things about this prescription, right? Prescripted groups. I know that Michael O'Flaherty, the Irish guy who's in the European Union Council to do with human rights, he said something, sent a letter to not Suella Braverman. He sent a letter to Shabana Mahmood. So he sent a letter to Shabana Mahmood saying that, the UK government are overstepping the rights. But I think it's misleading because he's trying to make out that the UK government can do that or could do that, or he did not specifically refer to privileges, but he just meant the general rights of assembly. Because there's two different things that we have, there's a lot of confusion over, and that is that even before the Human Rights Act, before 1998, we're talking like going way back to 1936, 1938, you've got privileged and non-privileged assemblies, right? This is going all the way back to the Public Order Act, 1936, and going back to the Riot Acts, okay, and the Tumultuous Petitioning Act. Now, the Tumultuous Petitioning Act identified that they were privileged, but it made an offence if they didn't get consent first. They could be privileged with consent to have a large assembly, right? But that act did not, under any circumstances, stop people under 20 persons. Then you've got this Seditious Meetings Act that they had, which was temporary and expired. But it never actually took away the right for small groups or bodies of people because they know they couldn't really do that. But this was even before. This is actually not the Bill of Rights. This is before the Bill of Rights. 1661 is before the Bill of Rights. Okay? It's because it was to the Parliament, right? Now, many people believe that the 1688 Bill of Rights was an implied repeal of the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, and Herbert Broom talks about this in his book, Constitutional Law in Relation to the Common Law. You should read it. And there was a lot of dispute. Now, this is where there was a lot of issues with the Luddites, right? We need to talk about this because it's really important to know the difference. The Luddites petitioned the government over the wages. They were not like backwards, anti-evolutionary or anti-machinery in that sense. They actually were having disputes over pay and wages, right? They weren't sabotaging technology at all. They were disgruntled with their employers over wages in these newly emerging factories, working class wages, because it was outcompeting people who had skilled people, weavers, all these hand-skilled craftsmen, people who used to be blacksmiths who made spoons and all kinds of things like that. Factory production takes away the need for skills, right? And also it gives cheap labour and pay to people who work in the factories and they don't earn much money, right? There are lots of economic issues, and also obviously the people who run the factory get very, very rich, and then you end up with these Mark Zuckerberg. Well, Zuckerberg's not a factory, he doesn't even want any people working for him, right? You see, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't really want any staff working there if he can help it, right? But, Jeff Bezos, all these people who have got all the money, right? So the Luddites were kicking off because of the wages. Now, I think we were misled at school and misled in education about that. Maybe I was too young to pay attention, but I'm quite certain that the teachers tried to make out that it was about the progress of technology and the development and so forth, which they were opposed to, right? And they never really taught us about petitioning or the right to petition or what the Luddites did in petitioning, right? But now, the Luddites were after 1688 with a Bill of Rights, which says that it's illegal to be prosecuted if you're doing petitions, right? Now, there was the 1661 Act, which sort of put a limit on the numbers of people. Obviously, you can have small numbers of people. Now, this is a thing, right? The Luddites went and started breaking these machines and smashing machines up as a result of their petitions getting ignored, right? And their promotion of the petitions getting ignored. Even when they went about it lawfully, right? By putting them in the newspapers and getting the court consent and doing the petitions. Now, when the Luddites are smashing machines up, right, it's private property, right, on private land. Even though they might work there, it's still privately owned. It's not public property or public land. It's a private factory. They might work there. If you're employed there, you've got a right to be on there, right, but you don't own it. Okay. Now, they started smashing and breaking these machines. Now, an act was made by the government to make explicitly machine breaking itself illegal, but that does not affect the right to petition. Now, we've got these right acts at that point, and there's a difference between a crime that is done privately or and on private land. Obviously, if it's your own land, right, you own the land, right, but it still could be a private crime. And an act done on behalf of a group of people, a public body, officially, if it's done in connection with or resulting from a matter of record, a writ of record, particularly if it's to Parliament, because those matters are to be heard in and by the Parliament and no other court, right? Now, all those right acts distinguish between these things that damage might be done in public as resulting out of public assemblies when it's done in public, on public land, by members of the public who are engaged and acting on behalf of the public, right? Not privately. They're not acting privately. They're acting on behalf of a declared public cause, and it is a matter of record and writ, whether they're advertising it and so forth. Now, if anything arises out of that subsequently, and anything gets broken, it's public property on public land, it wasn't regarded as a crime or being an offence in the riot, okay? Because remember that, it's very important to remember this, that John Pym, in the short parliament, they said that grievances are not crimes, okay? Grievances are not crimes. So, now, lots of things happen with the Luddites. Some of them got hung and so forth, but we've got to understand, right? And I think someone got killed or murdered over Halifax way, or it might have even been in Marsden or somewhat. This isn't actually in this county, right? Now, that incident where the Luddites got hung was to do with because a factory owner or mill owner got killed or attacked, right? And then you've got the machine breaking, which is, it was regarded as a private crime, right? They didn't consider it as groups of petitioners in small bodies, like under 20 people, advertising or promoting the petition, okay? Like sort of a little bit like Extinction Rebellion are doing now, going on to these army bases and smashing stuff up, or they go into the bank buildings, but they're only going into the bank buildings and peacefully protesting, but it's private property though, but they don't break anything. Gail Bradbrook smashed that bank window, right? That's private property. Now, if she'd have got a chisel and a hammer on, like, something in the middle of that, where she was by the bank, on the street, which was publicly owned, like a lamppost or something like that, it's different because it's public land and public property, not private property. So Gail Bradbrook and Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil were delving into the area of law, kind of a little bit like what the Luddites were, but not to any extreme extent or degree as the Luddites were. Now, when she climbed up and smashed the Department of Transport window, that is a public-owned building of the government. It's not a private company or business, right? So now that is different. And then you've got like Angela Ditchfield, who I think she spray painted on the town hall, Extinction Rebellion and so forth. She got prosecuted and she got acquitted, but then because it was in a magistrate's court and not a jury, CPS went after her to the High Court. But that she shouldn't have been prosecuted for that. Okay, that was Max Hill was the chief crown prosecutor, the director of public prosecutions. Right, there was something really wrong going on there with Angela Ditchfield's prosecution against her. Right now, with the Luddites. They made some acts of law to stop the machine breaking, but they didn't really necessarily stop the right to protest. You can't really. Now, after the Luddites, okay, when we get to the suffragettes, there had been some court cases about this and disputes. Now, according to the 1661 Tumultuous Petitioning Act, right, you had to get consent from the courts to get over 20 people supporting a petition and advertising it, right? But because of the 1688 Bill of Rights, they'd sort of decided, or the police weren't enforcing it and the government weren't requiring it to be enforced. So they were ignoring half of the 1661 Act, and they were saying that, you know, they were letting people collect more than 20 signatures in public and advertise it and come together in groups over 20 people. But there was a little bit of the Act, right, the last part of it, they were still enforcing that part of it, and that was to have more than 10 persons present the petitions, right, go into Parliament with the petitions, and come together at Parliament either to the King or to the MPs, right? And that's the part the police were still enforcing, okay? And that is what the suffragettes were pushing the limits. They'd managed to get half of the Act to be ignored, right? So even the MPs weren't making them... And the police weren't arresting them when they were collecting all the signatures or advertising it, or even coming together in large bodies when they were, like, you know, not near Parliament or the King. But when they went near Parliament or the King, they were even trying to sneak there, like, separately, like, you know, and turn up separate carriages or walk there separately, and then sort of like all going over, like, you know, space of an hour separately and try to form a body in there, right? That's what the suffragettes, why they were getting arrested, not for actually many of the other things, you know, like a lot of those offences. You see, they will. I'm strongly believe they will have been exempted from a lot of the laws in the early Met Police Acts as well. All of the offences, you know, like blocking the pavement or going knocking and ringing on doorbells to ask people to sign petitions late at night, or you know, using horns and sirens, all those, like, they've got a lot of offences in the Met Police Act, but it's if you're privileged, right? They're not, that act does effectively not exist, right? If you're using privilege. So I would have thought that they were not getting prosecuted for all those things that otherwise would have been criminal offence, right? Under the, I think it was the second Met Police Act, right? But there's a few, but all of them say the same thing. Now, so that's important to understand. And by the time the suffragettes had finished, you know, the things they were getting prosecuted for were they were really wanting to rebel against a particular clause in that act, right? Whereas the Luddites is different because the Luddites were trying to stretch the right to petition is illegal to be prosecuted to the limits and to the extent where they were going to smashing up private property and land at the places where they worked. I suppose you can get into trade unions, you know. I think some of the Amazon workers, there's one of the Amazon workers had a trade union, and he was like, you know, pushing the right to be able to distribute the material around the factory lawfully and, you know, go on strike and stuff like that. They weren't damaging things though, right? Now, so there's this distinction in English law, right, between you can be completely and totally protected, right, even from if things get damaged or broken. Now, the next important stage is around the miners' strikes, around the time of Arthur Scargill and the miners' strikes, just in the early 80s, right? Now, we've got the Public Order Act, 1936 or 1938. See, 1936 or 1938 is the Public Order Act. So that was around the sort of war sort of period. Now that one, so that kind of updated from all those sort of riot acts and assemblies, but it's still allowed for the privileges. But they focused on like the wearing of uniforms or the carrying of weapons and things like that to do with assemblies. But again, it's still allowed for and counted for privileges if you've got them. Because you've got to remember this whole time through, you can have assemblies and riots and things that happen and damage in public, which are not a proper cause being advocated and advertised and represented in public by due process of law, which is privileged to Parliament, and if any incident happens to arise because of that or out of it, then you are protected because you're answerable to Parliament, right, not to the other courts. And therefore, there's a distinction between that and any incidents or riots or protests which are not, because you can have loads of protests. You can have workers' protests you can have protests against a worker for wages, which is not anything to do with Parliament. It's between the workers and the boss, right? The employer and the workers. We need to get that clear. That's the most important thing, I think. So, in the 1936 Public Order Act, and all of the Public Order Acts are meant to and do, if you understand them properly, whenever they're talking about protests in the Public Order Act, they're trying to get you to try and think that it's everything. It's not. Even when the police, do all this, we can disallow this, we can disallow that. Yeah, they can disallow, football hooligans forming a body because they lost, there's a big football match on, so we're going to ban gatherings and protests outside, what if England hosts the World Cup, all kinds of different stuff like that, right? And this is why the Hillsborough disaster was such a important political message. Now, they carried on with these Public Order Acts. Now, after the miners' strikes in 1985, they formed the Crown Prosecution Service. And rather than the police just, renting or hiring lawyers to prosecute for them, there was a proper organisation formed, right? Which I think is not a good idea, because then you've got a body with its own interests as opposed to, if you have juries of random people, you're completely impartial and biased. If the police were made to hire and employ random barristers and not use the very same ones or pick them randomly from a register who were qualified, then the barristers had to follow the law and the rules, and they wouldn't be defending or protecting their colleagues or friends or the CPS as an organisation, which, unfortunately, a year after the CPS was formed, I think they were looking for weaknesses in their own regime, and I think they thought this sort of tumultuous petitioning that was a weakness because people could go and get this court order to protect them, right? And then the CPS couldn't prosecute them, right? And if they did, the prosecution would be in contempt. A very serious criminal offence, right? Contempt of court and contempt of Parliament, right? So they scrapped the act, but scrapping the act is what the suffragettes wanted done anyway, right? So no one was going to court. No one was actually going and getting that permission because, Parliament wasn't demanding that you needed it. But people should have wanted to go get it, because actually there was a very important benefit from that, is that you got a court order. And okay, fair enough, if you're doing a petition to Parliament, you either have it, you have a political cause, or you don't. But if you've got a court order to back you up, the police pull you up or prosecute you, you get the court order out, it's a lot more substantiating, it's a lot more recognisable, and it's a lot more assertive. You see, this is like why bailiffs at the moment, bailiffs are going around. Verbs has a lot of issues with bailiffs in his videos and his YouTube channel, right? They turn up with, a court order to take someone's car or take someone's things, and then they ring the police up, and the police are backing them up because they got a court order, right? So the police are like, oh yeah, and then the people are arguing and saying, no, it's not signing ink, or it's not got my proper name on it, and all this or that. But the police are always back up the bailiffs and say, oh, we don't care, you don't need the right signature on it, or you don't need the right details and all this, right? So the police are actually backing these bailiffs up. Who the fuck are bailiffs, right? The bailiffs have got a court order, right? Now, if you have got a court order saying I'm petitioning Parliament and I can't be prosecuted, right? Then police turn up and say, like, get lost, right? What are you going to do? I've got a court order. This is a thing. And if they do take you to court anyway, they go into court and say, it's my court order, right? This is the thing. So the suffragettes, they didn't like the 1661 Act because of that. They really had personal grievance with the fact that they wanted to be able to hand the petitions in large numbers of people into Parliament, right? Just to make a point out of it. But half of the Act wasn't being upheld anyway. But it should have been upheld. But this is the thing, even if the suffragettes would have got the court order, it would have allowed them, given them official protection when they were in large bodies or when they were advertising and promoting, and if anything happened to have happened in an incident in public, it got broken. But it didn't matter because the suffragettes had managed to wangle that wasn't even being upheld anyway by the authorities, so they weren't getting prosecuted for not complying with it. William Penn was. William Penn and William Mead were prosecuted in public for having an assembly, right? A religious assembly. Got accused of it being, a religious assembly to, get people to support a cause or a religion to the government, Parliament, right? They got prosecuted. The suffragettes weren't getting prosecuted for that, right? But they really wanted to, they wanted to, make a point out of getting the Act scrapped. But ironically, there were some very positive benefits about the Act, but the problem is that because of the 1688 Bill of Rights, saying everyone had the constitutional right, you didn't. Everyone knew that you couldn't be prosecuted, right? So, and some people even considered that that 1661 Act had been fully and completely repealed, right? So it's like, because of the 1688 Bill of Rights, the courts are going to recognise your rights, but they're not doing now. They're trying to pretend that it's like kind of like fairy folklore, but it isn't. It was actually taken very seriously, all through the 1700s and a better part of the 1800s, right? Now, so after this, the 1980s, they scrapped that Act, but they've still got all these public order acts, right? But you've got to know what you're dealing with at that point. You don't have to get permission from the courts, right? And you've got privileged and non-privileged protests. But the language the government are using, people don't know that, they're not educated properly, and they think that when governments say, oh, protests are illegal, then people think that it means all and any protest, right? And then with the spread of information, then the police are making out that they can just, break people up and stop people doing things, but they can't. Not when it's privileged, right? And then you've got all the public meeting acts as well, where they can't break up people and they can't stop them transacting information if it's lawful. It's always lawful if it's privileged, right? So there's a lot of the police have got misinformation. The police aren't properly educated, right? So from the 1980s, then we've got this body called the Crown Prosecution Service, right? Now, the Crown Prosecution Service absolutely despise and hate our rights, particularly when it makes the prosecutor their prosecution the criminal act itself illegal, right? Yet the Crown Prosecution Service and police have got all these cool little things they're using, like assisting offenders, right? Which means that the police and the CPS can, get certificates written and not prosecute criminals if they want the criminals to help them do their work, and then they basically get a effective pardon from their offences. And when they're working with the police, they might be infiltrating certain drug gangs or whatever and so forth. Then then suddenly the criminal's allowed to possess drugs because he's possessing them to help the police and aid them, right, to catch criminals, right? So. Police, effectively, a criminal then can, walk around with the police and boot doors down effectively as helping the police, right? The police are trying to get some drug gang, they can kick the fucking door down, right? So, if the criminal's helping the police, now he might as well, he's a police officer, right? Special, he's a special, he's like a special, he's an assisting offender, right? So he's helping the police kick fucking doors down, right? Prosecution, right? Yeah, we are using a right which actually is more, protective than that. Yet the police are still prosecuting us. And if they do, and the thing is, if they do prosecute us, they're the criminal, right? Now, what about all this to do with, human rights and so forth? Well, remember that the first Public Order Act said that if you are privileged and protected, then you've got a right to the Attorney General or the police chief, right? You've got to be assessed properly, right? So that's like the first requirement for them to check your rights, okay? Properly in an act, because you got to have the Attorney General, because he deals with, privilege and parliament cases. The Attorney General deals with matters of privilege and parliament cases, right? Now, that was meant to be all the way through the 80s as well. And then they scrapped the Tumultuous Petitioning Act, where you actually had the court order to back you up. You could have said, look, I'm privileged here, where's the Attorney General, right? But then you don't have a court document to back you up. You've only got your petition. So, your rights are resting on your ability to prove that you have a case to Parliament, which obviously, if it's your case to Parliament, you've got your case, right? You have or you haven't, right? And this is the thing. And then you've got all these arguments about, observation of due process of law means that the community can come together to make a representation, and each one of them doesn't have to sign it. It's only standing orders of Parliament which started to require them to be signed and so forth. But under the observation of due process of law, no one signed the petitions, so everyone could just turn up, right? And say, right, there's 3 million people here. We want Starmer to stop digital ID now, right? And the police can't stop people from attending, because then you can't count the people, right? But I think apparently the police were saying they were up to 3 million at one of the Tommy Robinson ones, but the news were only reporting 150,000. So is that misinformation? Anyway, so 1980s, and then so the Human Rights Act. So at the point when the Human Rights Act comes into this, right, there's already going to be a requirement for the Attorney General, but we don't have support back up from the courts, and we've got Crown prosecutors who aren't particularly interested in protecting our rights, because then if they did prosecute us, then they're the criminals, right? And the police and CPS don't want to be the criminals, right? Because it's a crime, it's an offence. Now, the Human Rights Act, there are all these articles in the Human Rights Act, right? But let's get this clear. In law, right, if you're prosecuted illegally, you are the victim, right? And the other person is the offender by law, of the 1688 Bill of Rights. Okay, now the Human Rights Act has got loads of it's got loads of intricate and complicated legislation in it to do with the clash of rights. What happens when rights clash and overlap and intermingle? Who has the right? Who doesn't have the right? Does one right prevent someone else's right? You know, like the right of someone to have justice for something that's done to them, and so forth, right? But let's get this clear, right? The 1688 Bill of Rights doesn't actually really deal with any other members of the public. It deals with a prosecutor and the police. It says that if you are conducting petitioning, right, and someone brings a criminal charge against you, they are doing it illegally, right? And, you know, it happened all the time when people will be at the bar of Parliament, because even sergeants, police, people brought cases against certain people that were privileged, right? Even servants and so forth. All of the evidence for that is in the parliamentary journals, right? Because they had them up in the House of Lords for breach of privilege and in contempt, right? Loads of cases for that. Now, this is the thing. The Human Rights Act says that in Section 7(1)(b), there's a the Human Rights Act has got, right? The Human Rights Act, let's get this clear. In Section 6, okay, public authorities, the Human Rights Act, okay, with all these articles, you know, for rights and so forth, for the European Union, the Human Rights Act distinguishes between acts done for and by a public authority, that is the police, the courts, you know, maybe fire brigade, right? A public authority. You can also have the Advertising Standards Authority, Ofcom, stuff like that, right? You know, who've got powers, you know, like Electoral Commission have got powers, right? Local council have got powers and so forth, right? The courts are a public authority. There's a distinction between acts done by public authorities and the Parliament, right? And proceedings to Parliament. That's when you're petitioning Parliament and privilege. So let's be under no suella bravum, misconceptions or misleading bases. There is a distinction in the Human Rights Act in Section 6 between acts done by or on behalf of a public authority, the police, the courts, the Crown Prosecution Service, right, and Parliament. When you're petitioning Parliament, it's through the authority and proceedings of Parliament, like in Erskine May, parliamentary practice, misconduct against petitioners, right? So it's High Court of Parliament. It's not a public authority, it's Parliament, right? So it does not scrap or get rid of parliamentary jurisdiction or privilege at all. It distinguishes it from public bodies, right? Particularly if you're preparing or laying a bill to be put into Parliament as well and things like that. That's what the Section 6, one of the many section things that Section 6 distinguishes between and helps to clarify, right? If you read the Act. I never looked at those articles because they're so vague, like Facebook and YouTube policy, that, you know, it's like any reason or no reason. They're purposely, the articles are meant to be vague so that you cannot really, you know, so that they're made to be so, you know, some judge decides, not you, right? Because, you know, if you could decide, then, you know, how could you be? They're always been, ever since those articles have been introduced, you know, they've been disputing what is or what is not in them. So they don't tell you. It just says you got freedom of expression, but we haven't, because they're always arguing what the freedom of expression is. And then the government are making lots of expressions illegal, you know, like swearing or, you know, racist expressions or, you know, religious disputes or expressing yourself, you know, through prayers or whatever, you know, in certain places. So, you know, they were purposely made to be extremely vague so you could not get hold of them, really, you know. almost like water running through your hands, or it's wet, but I can't quite give you a cup full of it, because it's running through my fingers like that, or it's like sand, I've got the freedom of expression, will make me a sandcastle, and then the next week it's gone away the next day because the water washed it away, right? Or those articles are almost like water, like trying to pick up a handful of water, there's some water there, but I can't quite get hold of it, right? Because they keep saying, no, I can't do this, or I can't do that. You can't hold the water, you got the right to, well, my hand's wet, yeah, but it's not your hand's wet, but, you haven't got a handful of water, have you? So you can't have that article because, yes, but, my hand's wet and I just picked up a handful of water, yeah, but it trickles your fingers and there's nothing, right? Well, it's a little bit wet, well, it still don't qualify for a handful of water. That's what those articles are like. You see, I entered the Human Rights Act from the provisions, from the legislation. It's full of law, right? It's full of law, really complicated law. Like, if someone, falls over and hurts themselves in the street, who's got the, have the vehicles got the right for passage, to get out, to get past, or has the person who's injured got the right to lay in the road until an ambulance comes, and all this type of stuff. And really, those are the questions that they should be having with, like Extinction Rebellion and, Insulate Britain when they're blocking the roads, right? Stop blocking the roads, does the people's right of passage on the road override their right to protest, because, and Roger Hallam never harmed any private land or property, he was going to put an advertisement over the road and apparently it was going to cause a nuisance, but public nuisance, that's not a crime or offence. It was the newspapers who infiltrated Hallam's Zoom meetings and reported him to the police. He got prosecuted by the courts, went to prison, but all those prosecutions were completely and totally illegal, right? Because you can't cause a public nuisance when you're doing a political campaign or cause which is privileged. It ain't possible. And, there's plenty stuff in the control of advertisements which you can put advertisements on, around, or near or over the road, and if people want to stop, that's their fucking problem, right? People, like I said, people have been stopping in the middle of the road in London or China or whatever. There's massive 3D car adverts taking photographs stood in the middle of the road, right? Or stop the fucking car in the middle of the road, right? The traffic lights, get out and take a photograph. All kinds of stuff like that, causing problems, but no one ever gets prosecuted. The Coca-Cola don't get prosecuted, or the advertising don't get prosecuted, or they had a big Starship Enterprise. All that stuff is actually ingeniously and deviously fucking done to actually flaunt the fact that the enterprises and corporate businesses have been getting away with absolute murder because they're giving money to do things which actually they're not even letting privileged people do who aren't even liable to be prosecuted, right? I should actually get this Ben Habib advert up. Well, not an advert. I was talking about this Ben Habib discussion because this is in response to Lembit and to Ben Habib, right? When they were talking about, prescribed organisations. So, so Human Rights Act, right? So, Section 7(1)(b), okay, or is it Section 8(1)(b)? I think it's Section 7(1)(b), right? It's either 7(1)(b) or 8(1)(b). I think it's after. I think Section 6 is public authorities. The section after public authorities, I think the public authorities is 6. In fact, it could even be, the clause for that parliamentary one in that public authorities one is something like 666 or 999 or something like that. It's like Section 6 Clause 6 or Section 9 Clause 9, or it's something like significant that it makes a mocking joke. Like it's not something like 999 or 666 or something like that. They've got that clause, that number, right? And then the next section after, in 1B, is that if you are a victim of an unlawful act against you, okay, it's got to be unlawful though, right? Then you can rely on that right in absolutely any proceedings at all. Any proceedings. that means that it could be any proceedings in any day, any time, in any court, at any point, right? Now, you need to understand this, right? When you are ill and poorly, right, if they do not allow you your rights, you're a victim, right? So if you've got a doctor's certificate that you're ill, right, you can rely on that in any proceedings, which is why you can rely on it after you've been prosecuted, after you have been convicted of a crime, and you go to community service and you are serving a sentence, right, and you become ill. You can rely on that right in the proceedings, which the probation service do for you, to tell the court that you're poorly, right? After you've been convicted, right? And they can go get your sentence discharged, right, on the doctor's surgery certificate. Now, you need to understand also that that is not a defence against a criminal charge. And the probation service aren't defending you. They're not your defence solicitor. They're impartial, right? They are an impartial third party who is acting on behalf of the state, on behalf of the government, right, to make sure that you do your order. But they've got... Now, this is the thing what happens in 2005, right? Every defendant, every single person has to have their rights recognised by each and every party when they're in use, or when you... And you don't have to claim it, right? If it's apparent, right, or if it's recognisable, noticeable, understandable, and the judge or the prosecutor or the probation service know that you're poorly or have reason to believe that you're poorly, they can have to act, because of the overriding objectives in the criminal procedure rules, right? And the civil procedure rules, because you are a party, a defendant, right? So, this is the thing. You've got a doctor's certificate and you lay it. That's the thing. Now, the privileges of Parliament are a right. They're not a defence against a criminal charge, right? They are a right, the constitutional right in law, okay? And that's why you're meant to really get MP surgery, right? And so forth. That means that the probation service can go in and represent that for you, even after you've been prosecuted. You could get your order discharged after you've been prosecuted, right? Because you can rely on a right in any proceedings if you are a victim of an unlawful act. Now, this is the thing. If the CPS and police ignore the fact that that you're severely ill, right, then you become a victim, right, of neglect and etc. and so forth, right? Now, when the police and probation and CPS fail to recognise that they are prosecuting you illegally, because the prosecution is the crime in that instance, right? And it doesn't actually matter if, you had a fight in the street and there is another party or victim. That's actually irrelevant at this point, right? If you had a fight in the street with someone, which an incident arose out of a political action, right? Whether Human Rights Act says that other person has got the right to justice, okay, that does not stop it being illegal for the CPS or police to prosecute you. It says that it's illegal for them to prosecute you. Right now, this is the thing, if the judge thinks that the 1688 Bill of Rights is incompatible with the Human Rights Act, then why doesn't he do the, there's an incompatibility with a convention right here, right? There's a process in the Human Rights Act and in the criminal procedure rules, right? All of them since 2005 onwards up till now, right? that if a judge thinks that there's an incompatibility with convention rights, those European rights, he has to report it to Parliament, right? But they haven't reported to Parliament. They haven't said that the Bill of Rights is incompatible, or else they challenged it. They don't even want to recognise that we're using it, or that it's in effect, because then the CPS and, prosecutors and police are criminals and need to be prosecuted. Who's going to prosecute them? Other CPS, they're prosecuting themselves, their own colleagues and friends, right? Now, this is a thing. And maybe the judge can say, oh, well, we think the 1688 Bill of Rights is incompatible with the Human Rights Act. Well, say it then. Say it. And in the meantime, get these police fucked with the law, right, and the CPS. This is the problem. They haven't said there's an incompatibility with the Human Convention right, okay? Now, this is what they've done with those immigrants coming in. All these illegal immigrants and so forth have been coming into the country, and then someone said, oh, this is incompatible with the Human Rights Act. They've got a right to be here. Now, that is what Ben Habib and Lembit were talking about. And Ben Habib with that guy with the bald head in the other video, what was he called? I don't know, but I've got it on my... I put it on my main website page, right, to do with, illegal immigrants coming in. Oh, well, everyone is equal around the world. Everyone's got the same rights as us. Well, no, everyone in the whole world doesn't have the same rights as us, or they'd be able to drive with a driving license, right? You wouldn't need you wouldn't need a driving license. If everyone in the world had the same rights as us, then they wouldn't need a driving license to drive, right? Or I'd have the legal right to have a driving license if I could drive 100 meters in a straight line like someone in Saudi Arabia, right? The Human Rights Act does not say that every single law in every country is the same, because then you can't have different laws in different countries. All it says is that there are those main articles, but those main articles are lucrative. They're like, they're mercurial. Those articles are mercurial and they're to be debated. This is why if a judge happens upon a case where he finds a law is not compatible with that, he can challenge it and raise it. Like with that Matthew Houston case the other day, he was in possession of psilocybin, right? Like magic mushrooms. And I'm like, well, you've got a legal right to manifest a religion in the Human Rights Act, so that's incompatible. The illegality of psilocybin, right? Magic mushrooms is incompatible with the Human Rights Act. Incompatible with the Human Rights Act, because the right to manifest a religion. So you've got to provide the evidence that, there is this religion and it uses these, sacraments, blah, 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 which I've got evidence for that, right? I submitted it, and you get Professor David Nutting with all his evidence, right? That, it is a religious sacrament and you need it to practice the religion and manifest it. That's an example. No one's challenged the government on the illegality of psilocybin, right? But this is the thing. They've had this debate in the courts, or a case, about the status of immigrants or illegal immigrants in relation to that Human Rights Act, right? They challenged it. They haven't challenged the, legality of psilocybin. They haven't challenged, the 1688 Bill of Rights. And they haven't challenged, there are loads of, and this is the thing, the government are putting so much law through now which is not compatible with that Human Rights Act, like the right to life. So they've got abortion, right? They've legalised, abortion or whatever. Surely that's against the right to life of a living being that's growing. And then they've got, all these assisted suicide acts they're trying to get through. That's against the right to life, the life itself. When you cut yourself, your body heals itself. Even if you stand there and you go into court, right, and you hold your hand up on oath, right, in a courtroom and say, God, I do not want my hand to heal, right? I command God. I hereby, John Smith, command God that my body does not want to fucking live anymore, right? But yet it's still, why does the blood stop running and it heal over and scat and stop? So your body's still trying to heal, right? So it's still trying to live. Now, you might have a severely critical disease, like, like they're saying, we've got 6 months to live because of cancer, right? But wouldn't it be evidence that if you cut your hand and it healed up and it started to grow again, that life is trying to live, right? So you've got the person's immediate conscience with their brain talking and speaking, right? And then you've got the subconscious, and then you've got the bodily automation and functions. Even though there is a disease, and even though it's affecting a certain part of the body, like, whether it's like lung cancer or other disease, notice that when you cut your hand, it's still healing, right? Isn't that the body, the spirit, the soul of the person attempting to continue living and to actually, in fact, heal, right? But yet the mouth speaks and goes, oh, I want to die. I want to go to court and die. But yet you speak to the hand because the face ain't listening, right? But miraculously, look, I just cut my wrist and it's healing again. What would you do if you went to the judge and said, Your Honour, this man doesn't know what he's saying. He's not in a fit state to make decisions for himself, and I don't think you should be making them for him either, particularly when human rights says there's a right to life. It looks like his hand's healing, even though he says that he wants to die. Look at that. Look, the blood stopped running and he's just scarred over. And look, the cut's going away, right? So who could you believe? This is the thing, right? So there's God there and actually life healing. Does that arm have a right to life? Right? Whose arm is it? Well, this is the thing, right? Who's the person? What is the soul? What is the spirit? Who is speaking when you talk? What is the identity? Who is the person? Right? This is, well, it's my arm. I can do what I want. Well, show me then, right? You stand there and you make your arm die, right? Go and say, I will it. I will it. I will my arm to die. It's not dying, is it? Look. Do it. Or will it? Well, I'll get an axe out and cut it off. Well, this is willful, willful, self-harm and vandalism, right? Most people who try and self-harm are put in mental institutes and so forth and not fit to make their own decisions. That's why you've got to get a COP 10 form, right? That's why you've got to get a COP 10 form so someone who's more responsible can make decisions for them, right? This is the thing, but we're giving this power to judges now, right? Yeah, but it says you've got the right to life. Life has the right to life. This is what Justin Welby's talking about, all life is worth living. But that's another thing. Then you've got, let's go into something completely different now. One of the other articles, like, the right to manifest a religion. Yet those people who are praying for dying souls outside clinics are not allowed to do it anymore. And then we've got multiple, like, the freedom of expression, right? So, if you are pissed off or annoyed with a particular thing, how do you want to express that? Crack a joke, or, what's the religious dilemma or the racial dilemma or whatever dilemma? How should we express that in comedy or a joke, right? Or whatever. Oh, we're not allowed to do that anymore. I can't say that. So, again, it's like, pick up a hand of water and it trickles through the fingers, like, oh, look, I've got this article here, the right to freedom of expression, but it's running through my fingers, like, oh, it's just a wet hand now. Look, Keir Starmer, a handful of evidence. Well, it's not really a handful of evidence now. Well, I can prove that my hand was wet. There was an article here. Well, what's left of it, right? This is the thing with Keir Starmer. Oh, Keir Starmer is a very professional, expert barrister. He writes very complex and long technical fucking arguments in the courtroom, like black belt barrister, right? Yeah, right, Starmer, get a proper job. This man could not stand up to a legal argument in court. He's not a fair fighter. He's like, he's not the best barrister in England. Put it this way, Starmer is not the best barrister or legal representative in England, right? But yeah, he's managed to get in the Prime Minister's job. This is the thing, right? So the government are intentionally enacting against these articles of the Human Rights Act, right? And this is where this is actually meant to be where the Human Rights Act actually works. And then if you have one of these cases, like, someone prayed outside an abortion clinic, then this is where the judge is going to go, hey, just a minute, maybe this is against his right for freedom of religion, and maybe that law that, they put through is against human rights. And he's going to submit a representation to the Parliament and say, this is not compatible with the human rights, but he's not doing. And the same in Scotland, you know, I can say, well, I want in my own house, you get the right to privacy and the right to all these other... I've got a list of them, you know. There is actually some other things like the right to family security and privacy and that lot, which YouTube and Facebook are making us give up our own privacy in our own house by consenting submitting to their policies to have their data, to have our data become their data. I'm making money out of it, and all that's against the article on the right to, you know, privacy in your own house and your family and so forth. Where are the judges in the courts sending the submission into Parliament to say that's not compatible with the Convention right, the Human Rights Act? They're not, because they never intended those articles to mean anything. They didn't want them to exist. Starmer and Blair want to get rid of all those rights because they can't actually have this digital ID, fully automated China social point system thing, which you're not left with any of those rights, not even life, right? I cannot believe Starmer is a free man. It defies the law of this country that Starmer is a free man at the moment, right? And I consider him under permanent house arrest, right? He's not. And he done it, you know, he don't want you can't petition about it to Parliament. They're blocking us with an illegal policy, you know. Trump's not taking any questions. I'm not taking any questions, you know. Starmer won't answer any questions in Parliament. They're not accountable now to the public. The BBC aren't asking them the right questions and pushing them on the right issues. The other MPs are up Starmer's rear end and they won't push Starmer on anything. If any person in this country had a clue what the fuck was going on and could get in a courtroom with an impartial judge, if you can find one, right, and could actually challenge Starmer in a courtroom in a fair fight, you know, with him not objecting to every single thing that you pull out, he would not, he cannot win because he is wrong. And I don't have to prove he's wrong. He's wrong, right? He is wrong. And that's the thing. All of these things all of these new laws should be being challenged. You know, maybe they could challenge the right to petition, but I don't think that they'll win because they're relying on the Human Rights Act 1998, and in the public authority section, Parliament's distinctly separate. So this is distinctly separate from the public authorities, which is the court and the police and so forth. So under the Human Rights Act, right, it can't be dealt with by the police or CPS or courts. Now, if someone was annoyed because when you were exercising your political rights and privilege, they might have become a victim, well, they can go to Parliament. They have got a modern means of redress. They can petition Parliament like everyone else, right? But Parliament they're far too busy with getting their business through, this business which is breaking every human acts right article there is, right? They're getting their very important business through private bills to get through, sponsoring private bills, getting parliamentary business through. They ain't got time for, you know, petty petitions and disputes, you know. Well, I thought you cared about people and, you know, cared about the public. Yeah, well, yeah, you know, yeah, after they've got the business through and everything else, you know. Oh, we've made a special e-petitions committee. Yes, but Parliament is primarily there to solve grievances and, you know, work on the laws of England, both, right? You know, I don't see them banging on about that in the Privileges Committee report, yet it's in the section next to what they're going on about in the Bill of Rights, right? And then, you know, they're rejecting 3/4 of those petitions submitted, all grievances, but they're rejecting them on a completely, totally ridiculous policy, which is against standing orders of Parliament. And if Parliament's there to settle grievances, and apparently they have to settle, you know, try and settle every grievance, they're not because they're obstructing and blocking them. Just like, Colchester Council are blocking and obstructing that Karina who went to some, statement, and they're blocking that. Yet he's privileged under the public authorities. Public Meetings Act 1960, the Local Authorities Public Meetings Act, that's privileged and an act of law, right, for a purpose. But yeah, the council pulling all these policies out. Oh, it's scandalous. You can't have scandalous because you what are the Parliamentary Papers Act for? What is the codified law? The Human Rights Act does not say that England does not have any laws, because Starmer's still making laws now. You can't say that, there aren't any laws in England. Either they are or they aren't. Obscene publications in England, therefore, applies. That act applies to foreigners and English people alike. That means that a foreigner, if it's in the public good, can put an obscene publication as much as an English person. Doesn't mean that act does not exist or does not apply. Otherwise, we don't have any law in this country. This is the thing. Where are the judges saying that the YouTube policy is not compatible with the right to privacy, the right to the Constitution of England, and so forth? There are no legal cases for that. Joyland Moore is having a joyride, with his public funding and his warm cuddly sweater or whatever, coming out smug as a chuffing chipmunk, right? Ooh, Smam, I've just proved, all this, gender bend, all these gender laws. We just won. We could have a certificate, call yourself whatever you want, right? But why isn't Joyland Moore calling them out for incompatibility of human rights of all the new laws that are coming through, right? And where's the right to a gender, and where's the right, You see, this gender thing, actually, also, on that point, while it's fresh, I just thought of it now, is that it's a little bit like that example that I gave when I said, cut my hand, but, it's healing, even though you're critically ill, but some part of me still trying to live, right? The body doesn't always want what the person's asking for, right? This is the thing. And with all this gender identity, the person might say, I want to be a woman, but I'm a man. This is the thing. It's that they're trying to. This is where we've lost touch with religion, because what religion does, it explores the body, it explores the soul, and it explores the spirit of the individual, and actually what those things are, right? And that is a religious viewpoint, understanding the human condition and the human being. And that is one thing, which we've lost, which you're taught from these religious sacraments, which aren't really given any value or taken seriously now, right? And instead, it's very immediate gratification. It's like whatever person, an advert pops up on their phone, and I want that, right? And then next thing you're in court, and you say, this is what I want, and then you're using all this legislation, and then the judge making a decision on it, just because a person wants something, yet they only want it because, some advertising company popped up on the screen, right? And then it's like, oh, no, I want to be a man. And then oh, no, I saw this cool advert, and I want to be a woman now, or, this or that, or people are saying that I should do. And then all this immediate gratification and this kind of demanding material and physical things and so forth. Yet, some people, and this is when people have got eating disorders, but also they've been pushed on with the adverts and the advert influences. And this is where those religious sacraments actually explore and open up the mind to be able to sit back and evaluate a dialogue between the body and the mind, the spirit and the soul. What does my body need? What is my body asking? As opposed to what does my ego want immediately now, and so forth, right? And that's one of the big obstacles for Tony Blair, because, Tony Blair, he's a drug czar. Hey, Tony, he's a drug czar. He's a very rich one as well, very, very powerful. He's got a team, an army. He might even be in control of his own Starship Enterprise, right? He's a very important, powerful man, Tony Blair, make sure the people know what they want or what you're selling them. Well, digital ID, that's the way to do it. Mechanisms of implementation, right? But I'd probably be better understanding and knowing what I was. Maybe if I had a dialogue, with my own body and soul and consciousness and made a discussion about that, rather than some cool advert or TV show like fucking Loose Women trying to tell me what gender I'm supposed to be, right? This is the thing. Corporate companies selling products, selling sexes, and then the next thing, like what Robert F. Kennedy said, they put a chemical on a frog and it changes gender, right? Then they've got this new cool thing where you don't have to just design your own fingernails, like what colour fingernails do you want, right? Now, you can make a man in 3 weeks, actually in 4 days, right? Or whatever. All these other things, and then what child do you want? Do you want a Chinese kid? Do you want an Indian kid? Do you want you take your pick? It's like on the Titty Twister in Dusk Till Dawn. This is the thing. Anything that you could possibly dream of or want, you can have in the world of these. It's like that's what Andrew Bridgen said. He's like, what they wanted Andrew Bridgen to show up, and offered him anything in the world, but he wouldn't say which MP it was. Was it David Davis? Who was it? Was it Jeremy Hunt? Who was it? Who offered him these, riches galore? Anything in the world that he wanted to show up. And this is where we are with these people. These people want to buy and pay people off with things. And they want to make money out of us as well, not us sit down spiritually and reflect and evaluate and come to his own decisions without the added influences, which we've got consent, submit, accept now, unless you pay up on all this YouTube and things like that. Also, to listening to your family, giving you details away in your own home. It's evaluating you, it's assessing you. In fact, YouTube and Zuckerberg and the old Google thing are assessing us now and evaluating us and using that data and information, and they're going to do it with the health more than they trust us to evaluate ourselves with religious sacraments that we've actually been using for not just, since the 1900 or since 1800, right? The last 250 years or whatever. Thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and suddenly now the best advisor you can get is a AI Google fucking search bot, right? Not your own, evolutionary ancestors and so forth. And this is why we've got a lot of disputes, therefore, which are the prominent religions and etc. But I can tell you now, right? Parliament, Starmer is a criminal. Keir Starmer is a criminal Crown prosecutor with his gang, right, and the police, right? They're criminals, they need prosecuting. They broke the law, and if he wants to challenge it and say that it's incompatible with a human right, then he's welcome to try that. But I'd like to see him try it when he's already separated and distinguished public authorities from Parliament in that act, right? Separate jurisdictional authorities. So, even if you have, caused offence to someone and they've got a right to justice, not through those public authorities, through Parliament, right? So Starmer's the running man. He's not the Prime Minister of England, right? Keir Starmer isn't the Prime Minister of England. He's going in there, he's pretending to be, he's broke the law of England, he's committed perjury, contempt, corruption, and possibly treason. He can pretend to be the Prime Minister of England for as long as he wants. He's forfeited legal entitlement to be the Prime Minister of England. He isn't the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer isn't the Prime Minister of England. He is a criminal, and he needs to stand down now before his crimes get any more serious. And they can't be any more serious, right? And this is the thing with Starmer. He's on the edge. He's beyond the edge. He's all or nothing. He carries on the charade, or it's game over. So he can continue the charade, and he'll push us to war if he has to escape, to get away with it, And this is what these people do, They're willing to sacrifice the whole world to get what they want, right? So this is the problem with these people, and Mark Zuckerberg's prepared for it. He's built his bunker. He's like, let's do this. Let's take over the world. I'm in. Consent to me, accept or die. And this is what Elon Musk says, fight or die. But exactly on whose side? Mark Zuckerberg takes it seriously. He's built himself a freaking bunker under the ground, right? Apparently Trump, I don't know, I think Google will probably have a few of them all over the world. I would have thought Google has probably got 5 or 6 of them, one on each continent. Although I don't know, they might have 2 on each continent, They're probably all within, an hour's driving distance. So these people are prepared for it, right? They're all ready, I want to see a judge in England, if we haven't got one who's absolutely purely rotten to the core. Where is the incompatibility with the right to a family, privacy and peace and so forth, and these policies which Google are giving us no alternative? You will accept the policy or that, there's no, we don't have the option. We don't have the option because Starmer is going to make the digital ID and everything integrated with those. That's why he's advertising it on the Parliament website. And then you won't actually have a choice of submit, consent, accept. You will have the digital ID, or you will not actually have any rights, like, never mind freedom of expression, you have a right to work. And you haven't got, he's saying, in order to have the right to work, you've got to have an ID, right? No, Starmer doesn't know what a right is. When you come out of a womb, after not being terminated illegally, you got a right to life. And then, in your natural state, by being in this country, these are your rights. You aren't required to do anything to have them, right? It isn't a right if you've got to do it. It's only a right if someone else cannot make you do it, okay? You have a automatic right, okay? It is a right. You are right to do it, okay? So Starmer doesn't know his definitions. I don't. There are lots of things that Starmer knows that I don't know. Lots of legal terms, I only happen to know what plaintiff is since, I started reading about law. I also wouldn't even know what plaintiff is, right? There are loads of fancy, complicated words in the legal system that I don't know what the fuck they are, and intricate little fancy procedures. But inclusive of those, right? Starmer, he is wrong, right? Starmer is wrong, and he's breaking the law. And I don't think that he makes good legal arguments. His legal arguments are terrible. They're the worst legal arguments ever. And when he's got professional barristers like cringing at him, like Black Belt Barrister and Coach Chambers, all these professional lawyers are just everything that Starmer does now. They're just cringing. It's actually now so surreal, right? That we have entered. It effectively is like a produced movie now, and Starmer's the villain, right? And I don't know how 60 million people. How can you have a bunch of ministers, send 60 million people to war just because they say, when 60 million people, they're democratically accountable to the people who can remove them and make their own decisions up. And then Starmer's like, well, we're going to take away that you're not going to go, we're going to call off the elections, right? Oh, so, just a minute. You're not a manic, deviant, strategically implanted agent for some strange cause which the average working person is not really interested in or cares to pursue, which attaches taking over the world as part of it, right? This is a thing. Starmer, like Blair, they're psychopathic, delusional nutcases. Their world is surreal. It's not the world of normal people. You might call them elites, but you have to be a sandwich shop of a picnic to get where they got. You either have to be in complete and total disregard to the country, or you have to be they've got a obsession. You might call it an obsession. You might call it, some kind of. They've got an object which they're pursuing, which is probably illegal against the country of England. And what they're trying to do to obtain what they're doing, they have to break the law, and they have to act illegally and treasonously in order to reach that objective. And that's the current part of it which they're in total ignorance to and ignoring in order to be able to continue and proceed, right? So Starmer ain't going to put his hand up and say, oh yeah, sorry, prosecuted everyone illegally, by the way, oh, sorry about that, let's go to the Human Rights Court and I'll try and argue that, we should get rid of the Bill of Rights or whatever. No, actually, you don't have the right to do that, because at this stage, you've already broken all these laws. So, the best thing that I've seen is what George Monbiot, did with, arrest Tony Blair. He did a campaign, arrest Tony Blair, and offered a prize, and a few people attempted it, and they got the prize money, right? Arrest Keir Starmer. This is the thing, if George Monbiot can do a campaign saying, arrest Tony Blair, and quite a few people had a crack at it, right? Why not arrest Keir Starmer? He needs to be prosecuted. Where are all the, Starmer's like, got the, he said on the radio that he's a hard bastard or whatever. Where's all these, solicitors, lawyers and people, The police took Paul Golding's vehicle, and then threatened his insurance company and so forth, These people are, they're not scared of anything. This is a problem. I'd like to see someone come forward, who knows how to do a prosecution and have a go at Starmer, but not many of them are, there are so many things, why are they concentrating on this Human Rights Act, foreign immigrants part of it? Oh yeah, because someone went to court and proved that, those foreign immigrants had a right. But there's loads of other things. Why aren't they proving life's got a right? Why aren't they proving the religious right? Why aren't they proving the right to privacy and families being broken with the platforms and all the rest of it? Mysteriously, it's not happening. I don't know if it's because, no one's challenging YouTube in the courts. But you see, YouTube don't prosecute anyone. This is the thing, right? This is the genius about YouTube and Facebook, right? They just use muscle power. They just have their own enforcement, right? If you break their policy, they just get you in the Matt Zuckerberg judo move, doof, like that. They don't go to court. So how is anyone going to prove that, Facebook and YouTube are, breaking our right to privacy by forcing all this stalking software on us and that? They're not going to court because they never take you to court, right? If you do something illegally through their platform, the police prosecute you, but they prosecute you on behalf of another person. It's never actually YouTube and Facebook who directly take people to court regarding their policy, right? This is the thing, you got Black Belt Barrister and Alan, art and media law. They're going to be experts in art and media law, but they've admittedly they don't know about constitutional law and things like that and the Human Rights Act necessarily. Why aren't people hiring these lawyers and barristers to prosecute YouTube? Because people can't afford it. They don't have the money, right? So then what's left is you've got Joylan Morham. He could prosecute, but why would Joylan Morham want to prosecute Facebook and YouTube for invading people's privacy, Well, this is the thing. What a good law project good for? Unless it includes some form of gender bending. And a lot of these platforms help him promote all that anyway. So, I think he's probably like pro digital ID, although I don't know if he's been supporting Big Brother Watch or not. But this is the thing. Whose side are these barristers and lawyers on? They're all on their own. They seem all on their own side, This is the thing. Joylan Morham could have gone into court, right? He could have got Starmer arrested and prosecuted, the whole CPS taken out, right, for breach of our law. if they want to challenge it, they can try and say the Bill of Rights in against Human Rights Act. They're not going to do that. They're not going to succeed because of Section 6 on public authorities, right? Which is a distinct separation from Parliament's jurisdiction, which is what we're using. So privileges do apply, right? The Human Rights Act does not override privileges. If it did, the European Parliament and European representatives wouldn't have their privilege, right? And they do. Apparently, they've got, the best privileges over in the European Union. They've all got, you can't be prosecuted or arrested for anything, right? So don't tell me that privileges don't apply. There aren't any clauses in that act that can write it off. I can tell you that because, it's all provided for in there. It's for... There are certain clashes between rights, like, for example, one I gave, if you're living in the middle of the road, does it prevent someone else from having their rights and so forth, right? But this is a thing, you're prioritising rights there. What you're actually doing is you're not saying that one person doesn't have a right and another person does. You're actually only taking a precedence and priority. And obviously everyone else in the road will be able to get past or can get past at some point, right? But they might have to wait until the person is removed out of the way. There are lots of intricate things like that in it. And I've got a book on it, but I ain't got around to reading it yet. But, I understand that act enough to know generally what it's about. So there's so many things the government should... The judges definitely aren't on our side, that's for sure, because... all of these new laws that are getting put in through. Sometimes I think they've won on some, like with the gender thing. I think they did win between the definition between a man and a woman. Generally, there was a Supreme Court case, but you're not getting the right people with the right arguments in there, and we're not getting the right opportunities. And I think there have been certain opportunities, but they're not getting used or made use out of. But yet the government is using every opportunity it can. You see, I think the government appealed. The government have appealed against a certain action at the moment. So what the government are doing is they're using taxpayers' money, right? Like the secretaries of state, ministers, and they're challenging some of these things and appealing it and so forth with our money, right? When there were petitions going to Parliament on these things, and they're using it to try and stop us from using certain processes which they actually were. You see, what I mean to say with that is this. I'll try and say it as clearly as I can. If you go into a court, right, and let's say that you're prosecuted for something like what I said is, it's arguable if it's against the Human Rights Act. So you get a judge can actually make a submission to Parliament to say, this law, we don't think that it's compatible with human rights, yeah? So how's that work out if Parliament are actually going to be opposed and even appeal against it, right? But yet, Parliament are doing that in the Supreme Court, but yet the judge in a magistrates court or Crown Court has to make a submission to Parliament, but then Parliament actually end up going back to ask the courts, right? So how's that working in the Supreme Court when it's the court who's saying it's not compatible, but they're having to go and ask Parliament, but then Parliament are appealing to the Supreme Court? But it wasn't His Majesty's Justices who called it out in the first place, right? That's very strange, don't you think? Because then Parliament are going back to the courts for the answer or question when it's the Justice who's put the question to Parliament, right? Is this against Convention right? So that was the Human Rights Act 1998, right? 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, so 9, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, so 7 years after the Human Rights Act, in the Criminal Procedure Rules, says that a judge, right, can put a submission to Parliament that this is incompatible with Convention right. okay, under the 2005 criminal procedure rules. But you could end up in the Supreme Court under the criminal procedure rules, right? So let's say that you end up in the Supreme Court from a criminal case, and the justice says this is against a convention right? I'll send a letter into Parliament. Oh, Parliament are actually going to appeal it. Who to? The court that just said it was against the convention right. So, if you argue a criminal case all the way up to the Supreme Court, and a Supreme Court judge says this religion has a right to manifest because your law's against the convention right, how are they going to make a submission to Parliament to ask Parliament to do about it when it's Parliament who are going to the Supreme Court to ask for permission to appeal? Well, if there's a Supreme Court judge is the one who submitted this against the convention right, is he actually saying, therefore, change that law? Not asking you to change it, right? He's not asking them, he's telling them. So, you tell me how that works in that context if I've missed something out of there. Because it seems to me that the 2005 criminal procedure rules, which have got that incompatibility with a convention right claim, which is mainly based on the 1998 Act, when did Gordon Brown change the constitutional law? The Constitutional Reform Act, was that 2005? And, Section 5, communications with Parliament from the court. That was 98, 99, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 year after the Human Rights Act. And that's constitutional change in law to make the Supreme Court. So, Mr. Starmer, you seem to be appealing a lot of things now. Oh, we want to appeal. That's interesting. We've got a case in the Supreme Court here. One of the judges said it's incompatible with a convention right. Would you like to appeal against that? Higher than an 8, higher than a 7, higher than a 10? Get the law changed now. Right? This is the thing. And I do not think that, regardless of Starmer's technical knowledge from being a barrister and working in the CPS, I just do not think that he understands the law widely and generally in principle, right? He's lost in the detail, right? When there are all these other issues that need to be sorted out immediately, and Parliament is at this second enacting against Human Rights Act articles, and conveniently now, the Tories and Suella Braverman have popped up, have a little molehill. Oh look, Suella Braverman, hey, I think we should scrap the Human Rights Act. What a coincidence, Suella, because they never wanted it in the first place as the bucket list. This is the thing, but that Human Rights Act actually does not intervene with our privileges, because it's got a distinction between parliamentary and public authorities, and it has to really, because of the European Parliament and European parliamentary privileges, right? I hadn't seen any European human rights cases where they've challenged the parliamentary privileges for European Parliament and so forth, and United Nations and all that. So, and then there's another. I'm pretty much at the end of this discussion now, but I wanted to talk. There's a lot of things to do with the local councils and policies. The local councils are just totally ignoring certain acts of law, and they're just acting purely on policy now and not on legislation. And a lot of the policy goes against legislation and law. Local councils. I've written a talk which basically explains that, all these contracts and deals between councils and corporate businesses, it can't be right, because councils have a business and personal relationships with claimants in cases which are before the council, and it affects the relationship for uninfluenced voting. Because, well, they're under all these where you've got to have impartiality. You've got to have, councillors have got to be impartial, and they're selfless. But it's the council with executives, right? It's not just the councillors. The council chamber is the courtroom, right? And it's the court, and the whole council is represented in the court. The council has contracts, deals, relationships with bus companies, electrical companies and so forth, who are bringing cases into the council that they want this or that, with the public as respondents. And that is effectively like saying, criminals come in, but the criminal has got a personal deal or contract with the court, right? Oh, yeah, I do the, hello, Your Honour. I know I just robbed a bank, but, I did all your floors the other week and, fitted your safe for you and, did all these, nice decorations and a bit of plastering outside. We've got a contract deal. Don't forget that. I've done all this good work for the court, Could say it's good work, charitable work. You're going to let me off. This is the thing. Oh, no, look, it's a police officer. Hey, tell you what, we'll let you help us catch some crooks if you want under assisting offenders, and we'll forgive you for all your crimes, and you can help us go kick doors down and get drug gangs. How would you like to do that? Oh, I'd love to do that. Oh, that's brilliant. And join the team, right? And then afterwards, you can get back to plastering doing the floors for us and all those other contracts we've got with, like the bus company has, Don't forget, after you've finished furnishing inside the building, you've got to finish outside as well. Oh, yeah, no problem, thanks. That's great, Hey, no secret deals or handshakes going on here. It's not impartial. And this is what's happened to the court, right? It's not a random. This is what happened to the council, the Court of Common Councils. You don't get a random jury in, right? Got a question, test these jurors. Have you ever seen this man before? Do you know this man? You're going to remove those jurors from the panel, right? Does anyone in this court, anyone in this council have a relationship to this person here? Look, it's the manager of the bus company who happens to be furnishing all the new bus lanes. And look, there's the architect as well. Apparently they got in a fight in the pub the other day. Have you got any relationships with anyone in this court? Have a look around. This is the thing. But that's the thing. This is why you're not allowed to have the mayor or councillors aren't allowed to be judges in the magistrates' court anymore, right? But you can have relationships like that in the council because it's still a court, right? So it's like, oh, look, here's the chief executive of the bus company. Oh, hi. Can we build some more bus lanes, please? Or we'll have to get the public in and ask them, get them to respond, Oh, look, now then, anyone in connection with this court building happen to have any personal relationships or business relationships with this bus manager? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, just a minute, I think the chief executive of the council does, and maybe the mayor as well. Oh, what coincidence, they've been passing all their plans. In fact, they've got a strategic plan to pass them all, right? This is the thing. Now, this type of area of law, right, there might be lots of policy, but policy is not law, right? The council's been on standing orders and on legislation, right? The principle of a fair trial and a fair hearing in a court of council that's going to get voted through with an applicant and a respondent, right, is totally and utterly violated and corrupted, right? Because the applicant has not only relationships with persons on the council, possibly councillors and mayors, contracts, business deals, they've also been giving out awards, to builders and so forth, and on all kinds of things. It's not all these tests that the Crown Prosecution Service is supposed to have, test the jury, this, when you go into the local council chamber, right, it's absolute bollocks. It's so illegal now. It's so criminally, absolutely and utterly corrupted. There is no justice. There is no justice at all. The public, the people, are literally and utterly disregarded in replacement of the will of the phone companies, the water companies, the corporations, the contracted collaborating parties who are indistinguishable now from the council. So you might as well have the council up in front of the council, right? We're building some more bus lanes. Well, the bus company might as well use the council now. Well, they've got enough contracts with them to qualify us, It cannot be lawful. But all these policies they're conjuring up and, implementing, on whose authority? Well, the Leader of the House of Commons and one chair from one committee cobbled them together and just signed it. 2 people signed it. Now everyone has to comply with it, yeah? Right? That's not a standing order and it's not the law of England. Well, it's just a policy we inserted, slipped it in. Where did you get the idea from? Well, a couple of businesses, the think tank. The think tank came up with it. This is the thing. The Labour and the Tories and probably the Lib Dems they can't continue. They can't exist anymore. It's not lawful. It isn't justice. And then you've got, Shabana Mahmood's wanting to get rid of, what's left of the juries when she should be wanting more juries, right? And put juries back in for local councils like we had them in for the assizes because the corporations are corrupt, And I actually, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think Shabana Mahmood actually, she's just like a member of a cool club. It's like, cool, hey, I'm in the government, I'm in the Labour Party, I'm cool. It's just like, Keir says this, it's like, it's about as engaged as, in Take That fan club, it's the Keir Starmer Labour fan club. And this is the thing, when, other people are getting thrown out of that party, like Jason Williamson, because, apparently their ideas don't go with the corporate agenda. This is the thing. But anyway, that was going to be a separate discussion.